Hi, I'm Chris Cousins. Today we're going to be doing a review of the swing of Jim Furyk. He's been a very good tour player for a number of years. Played in majors, played in Ryder Cups. He's won a number of PGA Tour events. He's known as a very straight hitter and very accurate off the tee. Good short game, good putter. The area he struggles with really is distance. So we're going to highlight a few areas in his swing that show, why he does have such control of the golf ball, and obviously why he does lack distance compared to a lot of other guys out there. So we'll start with the setup. If we take a look at his grip, you'll notice that you can't see it very well from here, but he does have a very neutral grip. So the V's form between his thumb and his forefinger, go between the chin and the right shoulder, sort of in this direction. So no great shakes in that respect. He does, however, and you can't quite see from this footage, he has a double overlap grip. So the bottom two fingers on the right hand overlap onto the left hand. This is quite unusual because it puts the hands very close together. He says it helps him, get his hands working as one unit. Not something you'd advise for most players because it makes it very difficult to control the club because you've got less surface area in contact with the grip. So not something you give to most beginners, but obviously it works for him. Looking at the setup, you'll notice that he's got a very sort of level setup where his hips are quite level. He's only got a small amount of tilt in his shoulders. The left shoulder only fractionally higher than the right. As a result, his spine is pretty much up and down. Now, this is due to the fact that his hands are closer together. When your right hand's lower on the club, like it would be for most people, to set up in sympathy with that, you want the left hip higher than the right hip, left shoulder higher than the right shoulder, and the spine sort of tilted slightly away from the target, similar to McIlroy on the right here. His hands are slightly further apart, still touching because he's only got a single overlap. The right hand's further down. Furyk's hands are closer together, which gives him a more level look to the setup, which will affect the way he'll pivot on the backswing. If we take a look at the golf swing from behind, you'll notice that his setup looks sort of very different to McIlroy. First thing we look at is the spine. You'll see there's quite a lot of curvature in the lumbar spine. It's sort of arched over this way. Compare that to McIlroy and to most tour players where the spine's much more, it's much more up and down. That's going to affect the way he's going to pivot his body going back, so he's not going to be able to use his body the same way that McIlroy or most tour players would do. The other thing to look at is that the handle of the club is almost touching his thighs. The hands are very close to his body here. McIlroy's obviously got a bit of room there. Those two differences are going to show up in the backswing and in the downswing as well. So if we take it back, as he moves the club away, the hands stay very close. The club works outside the hands. The club face also gets very shut. So if you notice the leading edge here, it's almost pointing down at the golf ball in this position. If we watch McIlroy as he moves it back, club face is much squarer. The toes more up at the sky. You'll also notice as he moves it back that the club shaft gets very, very steep halfway back here. So much so that as he moves it to halfway back, the shaft's almost straight up and down. As McIlroy's, there's much more of an angle to it. It's much more what we term on plane. If we look at Furyk's, the reason he gets into that very steep shaft position is because as he works it back, he's very, very little turn of the body away from the golf ball. So the fact that his hands are so close keeps his right arm on top of his left, hoods the club face, almost in a Colin Montgomery sort of style. And the fact that he doesn't really turn his body, especially his lower body at all, gets the club in that sort of very steep position. If you look at the two halfway back here, you'll notice that McIlroy's got maybe 45, 50, perhaps 30 degrees of hip turn at this point already. Furyk's got maybe 5 degrees, very little. And if we continue that to the top, okay, we'll see two very sort of different positions. Okay, at the top of the backswing, Furyk's created almost no depth. There's no depth to his turn at all. Okay, if you look at McIlroy on the other hand, he's turned his right hip a lot further behind him, so he's got more room to get the club down in front of his body. Furyk, he hasn't really turned at all, and as a result of not turning, and as a result of his hands being very close, the club's forced up into this very upright backswing position where the left arm's almost perpendicular to the ground. we look at McIlroy, because of his different setup and the way he's pivoted his body, his left arm more matches his shoulder playing, which is more textbook. Also, if you look at the position of the club face, just move Furyk down a touch, you'll notice that the leading edge is on the top edge of the club's about here, and his left forearm straight up and down, whereas McIlroy's match. So what that says is McIlroy's club face is square to sort of the path of the club. Furyk's is quite shut, but it's a bit deceptive. If you actually look at the two club faces, they're not dissimilar. They both hang at about 45 degrees. Okay, Furyk's is shut because relative to his left arm, it's actually pointing in a closed position. The fact that his arm plane is so upright makes the club look pretty square from there. If we look at the golf swings from the front again, in particular the backswing, we'll just mark his left hip here in his head. Okay, you'll notice that instead of turning, there's almost a shift to the right off the golf ball. So Furyk moves laterally this way. If you look at McIlroy, on the other hand, yes, there's still a bit of lateral movement, but he's got much more of a turn as opposed to a slide. So if we look at the hips and shoulders, you'll notice that Furyk's hips had turned maybe 5 degrees, so almost where they were at address. Shoulders would perhaps turn 70. McIlroy's hips have turned maybe 45 degrees. Shoulders about 110, 120. Now, this difference in the amount of turn is one of the big reasons why Furyk isn't as long a hitter as a lot of players. McIlroy can create a lot more speed in his body from here. He can create a lot more rotation on the downswing, which will give him a lot more length. Furyk's lack of turn here means there's not going to be as fast a rotation of the body on the downswing. The other thing that robs Furyk a bit of distance is the amount of wrist set he has. At the top of the swing, you'll notice the shaft, he isn't quite 90 degrees. If we look at McIlroy, a lot of other players, they actually have more than 90 degrees at the top of the backswing, or slightly more than 90, and then as they transition, they increase the lag. Now, as Furyk transitions here, yes, he does increase the lag, but he doesn't maintain that lag as long as some of the longest hitters. If we look here at impact, the left arm and shaft are going to form a pretty straight line. If we look at McIlroy, they don't quite have him at impact, but he's able to maintain that lag much longer into the downswing and therefore hit the thing a lot further. If we take a look at the backswing from down the line, we'll just do a couple of shaft plane lines here. Notice that at the top, very little depth of turn, club face very shut, hands have worked almost vertical with the shaft because of the setup and the lack of turn. What he needs to do now is to get the club somewhere onto this sort of plane where it's parallel to the original shaft line. He's so over the top here, he's really going to struggle hitting it. So what he does, he makes a big slide with the lower body toward the target. And what that does, that gives his hands and arms time to work down to the inside, because if you just rotate from here, like a Ben Hogan or a player with a flatter backswing, the club would work so far over he'd never be able to recover. So this big lateral move here gives him a chance to drop the club and the arms down onto the plane. So the shaft's roughly parallel to where the ball target line, to where the original shaft plane line is, which is pretty perfect for delivery. Now, the only trouble with dropping it down from this position is the right arm can get, for a lot of players, very stuck behind the body. So the fact that he's no depth of turn, the fact that he slides his lower body toward the target to shallow the club, yes, it drops the club onto the plane he's looking for, but he gets his right arm stuck a long way behind his body. So you can almost see here, his right elbow is almost behind his right hip. If we look at McIlroy, as McIlroy starts down and moves into delivery position, you'll notice the right elbow is much more in front of his body. It's more covering the front part of the hip as opposed to behind. Now, what for most players that'll do is it'll get the club face very open. So if you were in a neutral backswing and then got the club stuck in this position, you'd either block it right if you kept turning through, or you'd have to stall your body and flip the hands over in order to square the club face and hit it straight. So a very difficult move to time. When tour players refer to the club being stuck behind them, that's exactly what they're talking about. Furyk is about as stuck as you could possibly get, but he hits very good golf shots from there. And the reason is this slightly shut club face here gets counteracted by the stuck position. So the fact that it's shut compared to his left forearm is counteracted by the fact that that right arm drops behind the body. So again, the arms dropping behind the body will tend to open the club face. So if we look here, he's in perfect position with the club. Absolutely spot on. The toe straight up in the air, it's right pointing down the line. It's exactly where you want the golf club to be. If we look at impact, what you'll see is as he's turning through, yes, his right arm's behind him, but that club face and the fact that it's a bit shut going back and the fact that it's behind him have sort of matched up to get the club face nice and square, so we can just pivot through from here without slowing his body or his core down. And the club face stays very, very passive. So if we look at the leading edge just past the golf ball, opposite impact, go to there. Just carry on for a few frames. You just notice the position of the club face. You notice how there's very, very little rotation with that face. It stays very, very square through the ball and through impact, which is why, although his swing looks very unorthodox, he's a very, very straight hitter. That club is never ever shutting down. Okay, so it's very, very difficult for him to hook the golf ball from this position. Okay, but yes, his right arm's stuck behind him, but that sort of is alleviated by the fact that he's got quite a shut club face starting down. So the two almost cancel each other out when he can sort of turn through with his right arm behind and have real control over the golf ball because of how he's delivering the club here. There is absolutely no flip of the club. It's staying very, very quiet. The club face is staying very, very square for a long time after he's hit it. You also notice at impact he's way, way up on his right toe. Again, that's a sign that he's used his lower body a lot in the transition, which we'll look at in a second from the front view. Okay, so from the front view, what we'll notice is at the top of the swing here, where he doesn't have a lot of turn, he's shifted slightly off the golf ball. He makes a big lateral movement here with his left knee and left hip, almost sliding the legs toward the target. This is to give him enough time to get the club down, working from the inside. Again, if he was just to rotate, the thing would work miles over the top from the position he's at here. And if we look here, you'll also see that right foot almost come right up off the ground very quickly. Okay, it's a sign that his legs are really driving forward and he's doing a lot of work. The other thing that's quite apparent from this view is two things. First thing's the right elbow and the right hip. You can almost see daylight between the right elbow and his body. If we look at Woods, who's got a more sort of model downswing, so to speak, you'll notice in the same position he hasn't slid as far forward with his legs, and also the right elbow's much more in front of him. So, you know, he's much more what most tour players are trying to do nowadays. Very few have the club as stuck behind them as Jim Furyk, and if they do hit it well from there, they compensate in some way. Most guys that get stuck as that are very strong grips, and you know they'll play from a stuck position with a strong grip and hit fades. They'll struggle hitting the ball high, but they'll tend to be very good wind players and hit it very straight. So as he comes to impact here, there's no stall of the body. Yes, the right arm's stuck behind him, but he can still pivot through. The club stays square to the arc for a long time. The face doesn't flip over. And just past impact, you'll notice here, with his hands, there's very, very little in the way of hand flip or forearm rotation. Okay, and you can almost still see you can see all the white on his glove. You can see that club hasn't been manipulated in any way whatsoever. If we have a quick look at the swing of Ernie Els from the front, you'll see a very, very different sort of release. Okay, so in that same photograph there, or the same still image, you can see that Els' right hand has almost worked straight over his left. You can only just see his glove, whereas at the same point you can see all of Furyk's. Now Furyk's is much more passive in the delivery of the club. Now if we look at them both from the down the line view, you'll notice a big difference in the position of the club face. through impact. So as Furyk's coming down, he's no depth, he's very high, he's big slide of the legs to drop the club on the inside. The right hand got stuck behind him. The fact that it's stuck behind counteracts the shut club face, and then he pivots through with everything, the right hand behind him, but everything's moving. And we'll notice here, just past impact, the face is still very, very square to the arc. There isn't a lot of club face rotation in that release, which is again why we've said he's such an accurate ball striker. So if we look here, club face very, very square. If we look at Ernie Els, who although his swing's lovely and he's got great rhythm, it's a lot more wild drives than Furyk. He's nothing like as accurate off the tee in terms of driving. You'll notice that as he swings through here, his hands and arms work away from the body, and the toe turns down very quickly. So you'll notice where the position of the toe is here. There's much more release and forearm rotation that you can see from the front and you can see from this position. Therefore, he's not as straight a hitter. You know, he's much longer because he utilises his core a lot better than Furyk does, just as McIlroy does. But with the amount of forearm rotation in his swing, it makes timing the release quite a lot tougher. The other thing to notice is the butt of the club with Els doesn't work left after impact. It almost inverts and his right arm chases and the club works away from his body. If we look at Furyk as he pivots through, the butt of the club is almost working round the corner, which happens in most great ball strikers. The butt of the club's almost working this way, around to the left and staying quite close to the body. That keeps the club face very, very passive. Els is much more out, away from the target with a lot of flip in the release. Again, therefore, it's much tougher for him to hit the thing straight consistently. So, basically, in summary, a few things to take away from this. First thing is it doesn't matter really what your swing looks like. If we look at the behaviour of just the club through impact, Furyk's is a lot more stable and a lot more solid than that of Els, which is why Furyk is a much more consistent ball striker. He's much straighter off the tee, not as long, but he's much sort of more in control of his game than someone like Els is, in terms of his long game, that is. So it really doesn't matter how you swing it, it's how the club's applied to the ball that determines sort of where the golf ball goes. The other thing to take away is that in golf, often two wrongs do make a right. So, for example, if his club face is a little bit shut going back, and it gets it a bit stuck behind him, those two will cancel each other out. They'll hit nice straight shots. A lot of times, if you're doing one thing incorrectly and you replace it with another, you can't hit good golf shots. And that's how guys with swings that look like Furyk hit the ball so well. The other thing to take away is that your transition really does, and the change of direction really does have to match the backswing. For example, Furyk makes a very different downswing than Ernie does, because Ernie's in a better position here at the top. He rotates, because Ernie's in a better position, he'll have much less lateral motion and he'll rotate a lot more. Okay, yes, he rotates more on the backswing, which is why he hits it a lot further, but he's able to rotate a lot more coming through because he's in a better position here. If Furyk was to make Els' downswing, the club shaft would almost work this way, out over the top of the ball, and he'd carve it left. So what he's got to do is drive very hard with his legs to give himself some room to get the club down on the inside. So you've always got to make sure that if you're working on your game, whatever you're working in the downswing has to match what you're working on your backswing. I hope you enjoyed this analysis. If you've got any questions, feel free to drop me a line on the email, and I hope that you take something from this and you can apply it to your own game and hopefully play better golf.